How do you make comics without all the frustration, without feeling lousy and inadequate all the time? Join me, Jess Ruliffson,
And me, Tom Hart.
on the Terrible Anvil. Each week, we build community and shift our mindset about what it means to make comics and art. We're working through the whole process, one piece at a time, turning our suffering and angst into fun and glee. Join us at sawcomics.org. Hey everyone, it's Jess Ruliffson at Saw coming at you. I'm also here with,
Tom Hart.
and this is the Terrible Anvil, episode 5.
What's the title?
Well, it's very clunky, but right now the working title is How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Letter or Lettering.
All right.
Any fans out there? Because we keep saying we're going to talk about lettering and we've yet to do so. I think we might, but in classic procrastination style, I'd like to save it for the end of the call. Because I have 2 other things. One of them, Deanna Feinstein was asking a really lovely question for episode 4, and we didn't even get to it. And then I have a friend who teaches at the University of Edinburgh. In Fionnuala, hi Fionnuala. And she had a really good question too. So I thought we could dive into those questions and then talk about lettering, because who wants to talk about lettering?
So, sure. So, let's remind everybody here at Sequential Artist Workshop, we are doing a podcast about comics and how to not feel lousy while doing them. And the first 4 episodes were about exactly that. No concrete tips. Well, no concrete tips about your final art, right? We haven't gone there, and that's why the joke about lettering is maybe we'll get there today. But it's all been about, like, how do you not feel lousy? How do you put yourself in a mindset to appreciate what you're doing? Okay. What are the questions? Let's dig into the questions, and then we'll dig into
All right. So VIP first top of the call question, because I neglected it last week. Thanks for your patience and for listening, Deanna. Deanna asks, if you have too many ideas whirling around in your head, what's a good way of picking one out to work on?
Wow, too many ideas.
That's a good question, right? Maybe my subconscious just wasn't ready for it. Tom, do you ever have that problem? You write everything down that you think of and that I say, and I'm sure you write other things down. So you're kind of like a undefeatable note taker.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to ideas. Some people will write down really good ideas that they have. I just write down like puddles, or, or turning the dial or something like that. My ideas are just really, really simple ones, but I've never done a comic that had substantial numbers of puddles in them. And if I got that card, I have them in card sets, I'd be really interested. So I guess I would have 2 answers to that. One is about randomness in cards, and the other, and I'll get to that. But to me, I've always felt like ideas assert themselves. Like, if you have a bunch of ideas, keep walking, keep doing the shopping, keep doing the dishes, and notice which idea keeps coming back. That's probably the one.
I love the idea of ideas stalking you, just like lurking. Tom's doing the dishes again. Get him, get him.
Yeah, it's true. What about you?
Well, my husband does the dishes more than I do, and he's also more productive. He writes way more than I do. I don't know. I like writing ideas down for this book. That's sort of been a thing that's happening. When I say this book, The Bootlegger's Guide to Comics,
Right.
we're crafting this book, Tom and I. I say we, he keeps saying it's my thing, but Tom is helping me. But we invented this podcast to sort of workshop some of the ideas from the book. And I'll get ideas because it's the Terrible Anvil, the podcast itself, but the Emile Zola quote, you got to do stuff if you've got a deadline. The anvil's going to get you. So yeah, I think having like a weekly check-in or something like that is useful. If you have a loose parameter, that's also useful. I'm like, well, this will eventually be a book. and I could see it being about this length. Or I'm going to talk to Tom later, even if this wasn't a podcast. I would be excited to see Tom, and I'd be like, oh, I wonder what he thinks about this. So sometimes ideas come up because something else is getting ready to happen. Sometimes you're like, maybe you have a deadline for something else, like an anthology, and you have no ideas. And you're like, oh no, and the deadline gets closer and closer, and you're like, I gotta think of something. And then sometimes the ideas show up at the 11th hour, or you just think maybe this is good enough, even though it doesn't dazzle me the way some ideas, I feel like they leave me astonished. And I like the idea of, I don't know if it's good or bad, but sometimes we privilege certain ideas over other ones. And I get the impression that Tom just writes everything down. He's like, puddles, I can use that later, maybe. So ideas without judgment might be good too. But I do agree with what you're saying, Tom, about like the strongest stuff seems to always float to the top anyway. And then it becomes the easiest material to work with. And I'm like, well, this one's pushing to be in the front of the line.
Mhm.
But I have to make promises to the other ideas. Like I promise I'm coming back for you and I'll see you after the war. Like not to be too dramatic, but I think also there's this fear if I pick one and not the other ideas will abandon me. I don't know if that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody works differently, but I definitely have had to get used to the idea that if I have an idea and I put it aside for later, I might never return to it, and it might never have that charge again. And I just have
Mm.
to be okay with that. Um, and it's kind of sad because I I feel like it's like ideas are like spells. There's this moment in Miyazaki's Spirited Away where two of the animals or two of the creatures that have been turned into other kinds of creatures are sort of like asking to be returned to their normal self. And Yubaba's sister, the good witch, she says, "Oh, the spell on those two um, wore off ages ago. Turn back if you want to." And it made me realize that like a lot of our mental attachments to things are spells, and they do sort of fade. My daughter, boy, now we're really getting into weird territory. My daughter was going around numbering everything in the house yesterday. She had this bunch of stickers, 1 through like 30. And she was like, I'm going to number this. I'm going to number your phone 25. She numbered the sink 29. And it was like so cool and funny. And then today, I looked at the sink, number 29, and I thought, should I take this sticker off? And then I realized, like, yeah, that spell's probably already worn off. That was a spell for her that she was under and that she was transmitting outside of us. But I know that if she comes and she's not going to be like, where's my 29 sticker? She's got other mental things going on. So it's okay. Like that spell dissipated a little. And that sometimes happens with ideas. So if I go look at my idea bank or whatever, and I see puddles, I might be like, no, I think that's had its life. You know, I have larger
Yeah.
ideas. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm gonna continue actually. There was a point when I did my memoir that my agent and the publisher said they want another memoir from you. And I collected ideas like crazy. And I started, and they were good ideas for a while. And and I had this outline, this outline alone, the outline alone was 27 pages. And and then I realized all those ideas were slowly dissipating. Like it's not that they were bad ideas, it's just that they weren't ideas that mattered anymore. And I was like, what the hell? And I just let it fade away. That outline is in a file somewhere. I picked 1 or 2 spots that I really liked. To be honest, my the series that I had been doing for the past few years called Be Is Dying came out of one line of that 27-page outline. That was a memoir outline. That was the one idea that stayed with me. That was the one idea that had the spell still. And I took that and did 125 pages or something with that. It was great. That was really terrific. So sorry, I rambled on. I hope I answered whatever question,
No, I
but
like that. I'm
sure you
thinking, I
have
don't
some
know
things to comment on.
enough. I don't know enough about like sourdough starter or kombucha or anything, but it seems like ideas either generate and are like, oh, this is where the yogurt comes from, or it's like, oh, this isn't so good. Like there's this separation. But I don't know if that's a great analogy because I'm mystified by those fermentation processes, but processes.
Maybe that'll be maybe that'll be the next episode. You can do a little bit. Actually, how you tend to do things is you make the title and then you say, oh, now we got to figure out why it's called that.
Comics kombucha. And now I have to research how I don't even love kombucha. I'm more of a kimchi fan. I know they're different, but anyway. Or
Buried in
beer,
the
for God's
sand.
sake.
Buried in the sand for yeah, for 9 months
Bury
or
your ideas in the backyard and then unearth them. Okay. What
you
was the question? So
well,
Deanna was asking, we have too many ideas. I was also thinking about the idea, okay, so like ideas like fireworks, completely like, and then dissipating and magically fading into the evening, like Tom is describing. But there's also ideas that are very bossy siblings that all have the mic, like Beastie Boys or something. Like maybe there's three really strong-willed ideas and they take turns and they live in your book draft and you're like, these three things are all in the book. And then you start making the book, let's say, and then you realize one of them is actually like maybe two of them are a book and one of them is another book. So sometimes the ideas are very strong together and you're trying to include all of them. And then as you work on the piece, you might find that there's separate ideas or separate mediums or separate projects. Sometimes that isn't always true. And some people are very good at kind of stubbornly braiding the things together and doing that really well. I'm probably not that person, but I like the idea of like ideas having different energy over time. And I think it's true that they dissipate, but also sometimes there can be several ideas that are bossy at once. And I wonder what that experience is like.
I mean, it can be really overwhelming if you get, especially if you don't have the time to tend to them all,
Yeah.
the bossy ideas. I mean, that was what was going on with my sort of quote second memoir in progress. I had so many ideas. It was just filling up. And then um nothing, only one thing came to the fore.
Does that feel
Um
like an idea hangover? If you're like, oh, that was so cool, and now I didn't even know what was I thinking. I like the thought, what was I thinking after I've made a comic, but if I haven't made it yet and it's an idea,
yeah.
then I feel kind of bad. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't think I feel the same way I did about you last night. Cool idea.
But that's how it works. Because
It's okay, right? It's
an
okay that
idea,
when our hearts change.
yeah, well, an idea is an invitation to act, you know?
Mhm.
And when you make that action and you make that transformation, things are different on the other side. Um, so that's gonna happen. And you don't have to feel bad. Those ideas they can take care of themselves after you're gone.
Right.
You
And
know?
not all ideas are awesome. And that's okay too. Like it's okay to
No.
like give it a little bit of time. Or I don't know. I love having an idea and as soon as I have it, I like run to someone else. Like, is this awesome? Like I'll ask my partner or Tom if it's like Anvil related, maybe my therapist. I'm like, look at this. And it feels like when you're a little kid and you scribble something and then you run as fast as you can to the nearest adult and you show them, look, I did something. Like I almost want the idea to be just as good as the final product. And it does have that rush of like, yeah, it's almost better than the final project. You do get a little high off of a good idea. Yeah, it's
Right.
fumes. It's vortex. It's very enticing. But I think it has to be like that for us to act. And sometimes you can't or you don't.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of mental spell casting as well, right? How many you and I have both been teaching a long time, and how many times do you have, especially younger students, especially like teenagers and stuff, but how many times do they come with an idea that they've been like nursing in their mind for years and years, and they know everything about the idea? And it's usually world building, right? It's usually like how many characters they are and where they're trying to get to, and how, especially the relationships between the characters and stuff, and they've got it all mapped out, but the ability to act on it is totally different in comparison to the size of the idea. um so you have to be careful about, like, yeah, we all love that high of a great idea. I remember the first time it happened to me where and it was just the simplest idea. I was working on a fiction book, and and I was working as a dishwasher in a bakery, and I realized while crossing the floor that the character in part one had to be the same character in part three. And like my heart skipped, and like I was holding these dishes, and I was like, oh, and I was like so thrilled and excited. And I was like, oh my God, grant me enough time to see that idea through. Luckily, I drew fast then, and it wasn't a large book, so I made it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I
But I
still feel that
remember
way
those
about my
moments.
idea about the novel I want to make. I was so thrilled and like I really do think I think the final book could be really beautiful, but it just feels so good to talk about a cool idea when I can tell somebody and they're like, that is really cool. And I'm like, I know, right? And I can talk about different scenes and they're like, that's amazing. I'm like, I know, right? But I really should write it because it might be better.
Let-
Yeah,
Let's talk about that because I feel like ideas are bigger than than how we believe we can actualize them, right? An idea can exist in a bunch of different forms. And if the idea wants to exist as things you converse about, then it's just as good as an idea you write, quote, a novel about. A novel is just some weird recent invention.
yeah,
Conversation is much longer. And also,
yeah.
the tropes of novels are really strange. Like there are plenty of, slightly avant-garde and what do I want to say, modernist art and stories rather that are an assemblage of ideas that an author maybe had and just didn't see it as a traditional novel. And they threw these ideas around. Yeah, you could frame it with a storytelling device of like, okay, it's the Canterbury Tales, right? We're all sitting out a plague and we're going to tell you some stories. And then you just tell us the abbreviated chapter from the Nun book and another abbreviated chapter from the Nun book or whatever. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be this traditional novel form. It doesn't have to be any traditional form. It doesn't have to be the traditional graphic novel form. It doesn't have to be the traditional uh, serial podcast form.
That
But
said, though, if I have students and we're trying to get some work done or even get an early draft and we don't have a lot of time and we're trying to
uh,
motivate each other,
Anvil.
it's so easy to talk about the thing and then, the weeks go by and we're like, oh, I remember that cool idea. I haven't really nothing's happened yet on the page.
Well,
Um,
if you're a teacher and these are your students, then you say, get to work, stop talking.
well, I do, and then the class ends, so it's like not long enough to for me to like withhold affection or anything. So,
The,
um,
I mean, you hit on this earlier, like the act of working on something when you were talking about the bossy ideas or the bossy siblings, the act of working on it in a tangible way in some sort of manifestation that is tangible. When you start working, the ideas start to change and it starts to become an artifact. It starts to become a thing. Um, so eventually you do have to stop talking about it. If you're going to say, no, the idea is just an idea to talk about. Okay, I'll give you another example. This is cranky. There, there was a show. I don't remember the artist's name. There was a show at the Whitney Museum, maybe 15 years ago. Maybe you went to this, Jess. And the show was supposed to be really great because it was nothing but um, the artist's ideas and people talking to you about the artist's ideas. And so you go, and I think you started at the top. The Whitney has this huge rotunda that spirals around. I think you start at the top. And the one interesting thing was that it started with young children and then went older. These just people who were part of the show, who were part of the artwork, would come up to you and talk to you, and they would say things like, "What is time?" I don't know what they would say. It actually annoyed me because so you walk the whole rotunda and you get about maybe 8 or 10 mini conversations that are kind of pre-planned, but of course the conversants don't know your reaction, so they're trained to react to you. Um, and so I went with my friend Tim, and we went through the whole thing, and we had like mini philosophical conversations, and that was the whole show. And then at the end I was like, I do that weekly at the bar with my friends. Like, I don't know why I paid $20 for it, and it wasn't as good. It wasn't nearly as good. So like ideas can be art. Ideas can be a final outcome or a final manifestation, or in themselves, or language can. But I don't know. It's tricky. I wasn't very satisfied with that. I would have rather read a book.
Yeah,
So I'm really
and
rambling
you
today.
say it succinctly earlier, ideas are an invitation to act. Sometimes I'm glad I've been too lazy to follow through on, I don't know, bad ideas, but yeah, it's sometimes it's very generative to talk about an idea, and it becomes a place for other ideas. The best ideas I've had, if I had to think about it, sometimes I have an idea that's so hypnotizing because it's also maybe commercially enticing. I'm like, that sounds like a real thing that like might make money. And that's also why the idea is exciting. I don't have too many of those, unfortunately. Maybe fortunately. But the really good ideas are the ones where they're just totally steeped in curiosity and it's an idea that's sort of attached to a question. I'm like, oh, what is it like being in the middle of war and running a convent? That's really cool. Like women being independent but also like confined, but also in a really interesting social space at a particular time. Like that sounds really interesting. Like the parameters sound just as interesting as the idea itself, and it
Right.
becomes a playground that has it's expansive, but it has limits so that I don't lose the thread as easily or abandon it quite as easily. And then I kind of have faith that like maybe the idea will stick around because I'm still curious about it. Um, like having an idea that lasts longer than the this is gonna make me $1 million feeling. It's nice to have both, but I wonder about that too. It's sort of I don't know the second question we had is related to this idea. Would it be okay if I bring that second question to the fore, or should we keep talking about this one? Do you have more
I
thoughts?
one small comment about what you were just talking about, and then I
Yeah.
think segue into that second question, and that is that with your idea, with your statement about ideas that have some curiosity in them, right, and that are questions about things you're curious about, that's such a great starting place, and it's such a great idea because we're here, we're human, and we want to like fill up on understanding a little bit. I think a lot of us do anyway, and so um, it's a great place to start, or it's a great idea to work from. The mistake some people make is like, now where do I start? And then they think, well, you start with the beginning, and then
Mm.
you get stuck because you don't exactly know what the beginning is. The truth is you don't start with the beginning. You start with the thing that you can start with, and it's probably somewhere in the middle. It doesn't matter. You just start.
Yeah, start I think because starting is a chronological beginning. It feels like we
Right.
should start at the beginning. Like I'm starting. Starting is the beginning and ending is the ending.
Day
So I'm
one.
starting at the beginning, and you don't have to do that exactly. A few people in the chat were also mentioning sometimes I keep my ideas to myself, so it keeps its magic for longer, which I think is totally true. Sometimes I'll say, "Oh, wouldn't this be a cool idea?" I feel bad because my husband's always like, "I have a cool idea for a short story to outline it," and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good. And if I'm not excited, I think I just totally murdered his idea. And I'm more sensitive to that than I think he might be. But if I have an idea and I tell him all about it, and even if he says that's a cool idea, I know when as I'm walking away, I'm like, I'm never gonna do that.
That's a real thing. I think ideas are, at least for me, art making is kind of private and kind of intimate, and I think our ideas are that way too. And especially like ideas don't always like communicate well. Like to me, like there are any number of movies or stories that I like, and most of them, if you just describe the idea, somebody'd be like, "Oh, that sounds good." You know, the only idea-driven movie that everyone agreed upon was the one where Bruce Willis is dead. What was that one? The Sixth
The
Sense, whatever.
the
Or
spoiler,
I
Tom, The
know.
Sixth Sense, if you haven't seen it.
But that's the only type of idea that you can communicate, and somebody would go like, "Oh, cool." Most other ideas are just like, these are things like you say, I'm curious about, I want to explore, I want to do a story about being an emergency room nurse and working in this really hard healthcare system. No one's going to say, "Great idea. Oh my God, you blew my mind with
Yeah.
that idea." They're going to say, "Wow, I hope you do that. That sounds
Yeah,
amazing."
good luck.
Yes.
Sometimes we have friends that are like, I salute you, goodbye.
Absolutely. All right. You want to go to that second question?
Yeah, I'm just like gently scooting over to the chat, and I might have missed something, but I think people are just piping in and being more like church nods. But if we missed a question, feel free to
I know we
repost.
have Jim Hamilton in the audience, and I wanted to ask him, maybe he can answer in the chat if his obsession with falling was just something that started in the same way, something you were curious about and wanted to explore in as much detail as you can. So love to hear that in the chat, Jim, if you can tell us. But meanwhile, Jess, I'm also hoping to find
Meanwhile,
a second
the
question.
meanwhile, back at Anvil HQ, we have a second question from Fionnuala. How to reconcile what's in your head and what you put on paper. So this is also an ideas question.
Mhm.
What a struggle. I don't know. Do you want to speak to that, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do want to say something.
I do, but where do I
Yeah.
begin? Start
Oh,
wherever you
oh,
can start, Tom.
yeah, okay, agreed. Okay, great. Well, all right, then I'll just dive in. Like, here's the thing. No, I'm gonna get on a soapbox. We're here to like we're creatures, right? We're just creatures of God or the universe or creation, creatures of creation, whatever you want to call it. And our job is to just be those things. And I think we get all caught up in the weird customs that we are exposed to, and so we have an idea. Now we're talking about comics, and so we're talking about a visual medium, and we're probably talking about drawing. So when the ideas don't come out in the way we want them to look is probably what we're talking about. But that's
Mhm.
filled with so many expectations, and we've lost sight of the fact that we're just this like creature doing creature things, and like and just start. Make some things. Um, I like Linda Berry's take on this, that the drawing is more alive. I think this is what she says. The drawing is alive whether you want it to be or not. The drawing has a life whether you want it to be or not, or want it to or not. As much as you hate on it, it still has a life. It still has an aura. It still has an expression. And I think as cartoonists, now I think we'll get a little bit nitty gritty a little more, and I'll talk less about us being creatures and more us being cartoonists. Like, I think to some degree our job is to like draw, see the world, train this circuit of our eye and our hand and our world and our head and our heart. I keep going. And learn to notice what we're seeing when we put things down on paper or however we put it, and be open to that. Be curious about what it is that's coming out. And you just have to get rid of like those ideas that it's going to come out like the artists that you like better than you.
This ties my crazy thing into
Okay,
both questions. The crazy idea I had in the bathroom a few weeks ago, be more interested in doing what you're doing than knowing what you're doing,
right.
sort of answers both these questions. And that it was an idea I thought was awesome. And later I was like, is that awesome? I'll ask Tom. And they're like, I don't know, let's put it on the podcast and see if it sticks to the wall. But it is, I felt so happy when I thought that. I was like, oh, that is true. Like the work I do, I have more satisfaction when I'm more interested in doing it than knowing what I'm doing. And also the older I get, I'm more delighted by my this is the chasm of shortcomings I have. There's a really fabulous show on Netflix. I think it's still on there. It's called Nailed It, and it's
Which
hosted by Nicole Byer, who's a wonderful stand-up comedian, and Jacques Torres, who's a very humble, very sweet chocolatier from France. And yeah, I think it had like three seasons or something. But they challenge uh, like somewhat proficient, but definitely amateur home bakers who might have baked a few cupcakes in their life to build these elaborate fondant laden cakes. And at the end of the challenge, they show the what they tried to make photo and then like what their work looks like. And they have to stand next to work and be like, ta-da. And there's an episode where they make cakes that look like Donald Trump, and everyone ran out of time, and there's this beautiful pantry that they raid, and they try to find things to decorate their cake with, and they're putting fondant on like foam heads. Like it doesn't look edible, it's really scary, but someone used dry spaghetti for Trump's hair, and it was so delightful, and he has like bags under his eyes. Anyway, if you Google nailed it, and look for the Trump cake. Oh my gosh, I couldn't breathe. It was so funny. So hopefully it doesn't go that poorly, but particularly your style is forged on the anvil of daily deadlines, as Emile Zola says, the terrible anvil. That's going to influence how you, sometimes when we try to do the professional production level art that we see in our mind, it comes out like the weird uh, baking contest cake that was just completely made under duress. So you can try to shift the temperature of how fast you make something and what kind of pressure you're putting on yourself. Are you inviting the audience in too soon? Or maybe you're like, let me just stay curious about this and try not to panic. And if you need the spaghetti hair, sometimes you got to do it. That's okay.
Yeah, I love that. Are you inviting the audience in too soon? But here's the thing about Nailed It. It's full of laughter.
So
It's
funny.
full of joy. People are giggling constantly. They're they're in love with the process. It's fun.
Yeah. It
I
reminds me of how you talk about making music too, because you came to that later and you consider yourself an amateur and you force yourself to make stuff and not go back and repeat the same notes, like you let the mistakes stand, sounds
I like your take on it.
infuriating.
Something like that.
Sometimes you want to be good at something, Tom. How do you? This is also, I've noticed cartoonists and other creators will have the monolithic main project that's 600 pages that's taken them 40 years. And then they'll have these fun side projects like, oh, I started doing portraits of Abraham Lincoln in drag and so much fun. And it takes 20 minutes. And I think that's why I was doing my Prince portraits for a long time because they were small. I got to play
Mhm.
with color. A lot of cartoonists are like, when will I get to color this? It's not done. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
so
no.
like putting yourself into having something fun is nice too.
And you know who did that is Megan Kelso. For the long
Okay.
time, I think she put out 6 issues of her comic called Girl Hero, and she had her quote important story in the front, and it was called Bottle Cap. And she would do these kind of like easier short pieces um, in the back. It wasn't the epic that Bottle Cap was. Um, and everybody, including her, quickly realized they were more interesting, more alive, more fun, and just plain better. And she changed everything she did after that. Megan, since then, well, she did do one epic after that, but she's mostly focused on short stories, and she's a great short story creator. But it was that process of like having these like side projects that I think were to some degree less things she took more lightly, things she thought were less important. She was just like, oh, I'm gonna do this weird comic about like somebody's bike falling apart and them finding the parts and having a sort of psychotic meltdown. And that's just to play while I do my other dystopian sci-fi epic on the side, while I do that. But everyone, including her again, was more interested in the shorter weird pieces.
Hmm. It's also how we talk about our work too. Like, oh, I haven't made any art lately except for this to-do list that I doodled on. And Tom's like, that is art. That looks great. Make a whole zine filled with grocery lists. Let's do it. Yeah, so it's all about context. I think sometimes we think what we're doing isn't fancy, and sometimes that can uh, help us make the stuff itself and enjoy ourselves. I do think one of the big takeaways from the nonfiction class that just wrapped up at SAW, there's a 4-week class, which we're realizing is not nearly long enough. Um, uh, I think it was Ellen who said, if it's not fun, I'm not interested in doing it. I'm not doing it. And she's working on like a pretty expansive history and it's got a lot of moving parts and a long chronology and it's absolutely fascinating. And I think there was more than one student in the class. Nancy also was like, I have to have fun. This is going to be ridiculous if I'm not going to have fun. I absolutely won't touch it. And I like that they're putting it that at the top of their list of things that they
Mhm.
want from the life that they're creating with art. I
Right.
forget to have fun. I'm very goofy, but like I am like way too serious. Like I like care too much about everything except for the dishes.
You always talk to us about how toss off these drawings and you're like, I'm going to make it bad first. And that sounds like fun, where we're
Oh,
like,
it's so
the bad
fun.
drawings.
I don't know how I figured that out. I think I was really putting a lot of pressure on myself to make the graphic novel with the veterans look awesome because I'm like, they're veterans, they're kind of a population that's put on a pedestal for better or worse. And I think I was doing that too. Where I was like, I want to do a really good job because I don't think that people care about this. And I want to honor these stories because I think they're cool and interesting. So I should make it look really pretty. And then I was like, what if, what if it looked kind of silly? And I enjoyed myself more. I still took care to try to make the characters themselves look attractive if I could. And they were good looking people to begin with, so yay me for like I had good material, but yeah, if there was something I could make it a little silly, like a moment. I think there's a moment in the book where someone's making soup in the middle of Iraq, I think, and the main character doesn't know where his fellow soldier has acquired all of these ingredients for paella in the desert. He's like, I don't know where he got it, but it tastes great. So they're showing him like making this beautiful soup on the roof of this house. And I don't know what he looks like or what that house looks like, but I envisioned him having this really hilarious, like ratatouille ladle of soup and aromas and like this sort of goofiness that was really really great. I'm like, I don't know if it was like that, but the tone of the story was lending itself to that, and I was curious about it. So I was like, I feel like since this is a third party, I could get away with making them
Mm.
a certain way, because it was still honoring the story and it wasn't making fun of anybody, but I was really having a good time making it pretty silly.
I would imagine that the story and the what I'm saying, the subject of the story probably appreciated that moment of levity.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I did. You gotta get your levity where you can find it.
Um, I wanted to also just to hop back on my soapbox and to finish that question, which is
Do it.
what exactly was the question? Let's go hit it again.
Oh, wait, how do
Reconcile
you reconcile what's in your mind with what comes out on the page?
paper. I mean, there's really two answers, and one is like accept what you put on paper, and the other is aggressively get better. You
Yeah.
know, because like
Yeah, that is an option I'm
it
often
is.
too lazy to reach for. It's like you can get better, but
Yeah.
also like sometimes I'm like, who has the time for that? Maybe that's how the bootleggers thing came out. I was
Right.
like, what if you have to get it done right now and you rolled out of bed and unfortunately you didn't have it's not like the metamorphosis where you woke up as somebody else. You're still the same person you went to bed as, so you've got to show up and make it. And yeah, and
Right.
then I kind of started to push and be like, am I really that bad? Ooh, this is really bad. That's amazing. How can this get any worse? Like being curious about how bad it could be was really fun to me. Maybe I'm abusing myself. I should talk to my therapist about this. I know. I don't know. It was fun. I'm still doing it, so maybe it's fine. Is that okay? Tom, is that okay?
That you're having fun and letting your artwork be quote bad.
Yeah, I think
Sure.
I sort of made friends with my inner critic and now I feel like I'm roasting myself. Like I'm like, oh my God, this is so funny. But there's comedy in it, whereas like I think just the inner critic is mean.
I I think comedy and laughter is a great way to approach the world. So it sounds good to me. And I haven't noticed anything in the published stuff you've done for the, Boston Globe or anything that's like that makes me question your sanity or anything. So
Well, that's good.
you
What
seem
I
like
do think, like looking at published work, it's sometimes I'm sure we'll get a question about this if we haven't already, like how to I think it's in the list of bootleggers topics is old work versus new work. Like we do
oh,
change over time. And Maria in the chat was mentioning that even ideas are sort of like a timestamp on where our brain is and can feel like,
right.
oh, that's who I was in that moment. And that's what I was interested in that moment. Now it's shifting. So our interests change, our style or the way that we draw or the things we're interested in drawing change over time. And sometimes that can be embarrassing where you're like, oh, why did I think that was a cool thing? Or that drawing doesn't look so good, and that can maybe influence the way you approach new ideas. It's like, I think this time I'm finally going to figure out how to draw shoulders and eyeballs and fingers or something.
I just came upon this quote. I found it from Austin Kleon, so it's not like it was obscure. It's a Will Oldham quote. Will Oldham's the musician. I'm going to put it in the chat. I really liked it. Um, he says, part of the idea in making a record is to freeze lots of moments of learning and discovery so that it really is like every time you press play, you're opening up that experiment again. So I think what I've tried to open myself up to is like and again, I'm not doing nonfiction. I'm not telling at this point, I'm not telling anybody's story. So it's like I'm only honoring imagination at this point, and I'm trying to honor it with a certain amount of liveliness. But there is I go in knowing that I'm gonna like do something, that I'm gonna learn something new, that I'm gonna do something unexpected, and that's gonna be the fun of it. And then if I reread it, for instance, or if I listen to it or whatever, that I'm going to relive that moment where I learned this new thing, where I became this new creature, if we want to keep working that metaphor. Anyway, I like that a lot. And so for me, the act of creating is an act of constantly learning, like you said, being curious about the world. And it's hard. I've been trying not to separate the doing and the final product and the final artifact and what it looks like. I've tried not to separate that from the actual doing of it. I've tried to like let them be as much part of the same process. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe that's why I started acting so silly, like drawing stuff. It's like, well, how if my preliminary sketches are very, very silly, I do think looking back, like I've read the last two comics I've done professionally, I'm like, I do need to pull it in a little bit. I think I can make this like 10% nicer because I was really having fun being silly and working really fast with a deadline. I think I could maybe do one more pass or refine it just a little bit, but starting kind of at the bottom of the mountain and making it as silly as possible is really, really useful. But yeah, maybe it's like something that's adjustable and changes over time too.
That's awesome. And it's, it's beginner's mind. It's how a child would work. It's like we're trying to put ourselves back in a mind where we weren't so critical of the outcome.
Yeah, I have to remind myself like I was trying to make a list of hobbies. I was like, I don't really have any hobbies. And this morning, I was thinking of funny stuff like yoga, like I do that twice a week or something. Or cooking, I should do that. I mean, I cook dinner, so I'm like, that's a hobby, right? So I was thinking of things that I was already doing that was like not a chore and not something I'm compensated for. And uh, and I was like, I didn't even put drawing on there as a hobby. That's a
Mm.
hobby. But I
Mm.
think also if we're trying to attempt to be working professionals, LOL, um, we're monetizing what we're doing. So we're also like, if we forget to have fun because we want to maybe make a mark or we're concerned about audience, but also maybe there are parameters professionally too. Like this should kind of look a certain way, or I know based on my abilities and my deadline, it'll look like this, and then I'll get my check and it'll be fine. And that sort of becomes more transactional than uh, driven by curiosity, I guess, which is
Yeah.
sort of a bummer. Can we talk about lettering? Are we going to do it? Five
Don't
minutes
we
on
have a third?
lettering,
Yes,
and then we
but
can
don't
call
we
it the
have a third?
lettering episode.
Don't we have a third question?
Oh, we do? If we do, look, let's put up lettering just like we do in real life. I think it's very funny.
Wait. Oh no, that was the last question. All right, let's talk about lettering.
You just had two. Yeah,
Oh.
lettering. What do we do? Okay, so the title, this goofy title of the podcast was like how I learned to stop worrying and love the lettering. I do think beginners and comics put lettering off to the very end and uh and then we really suffer more than we need to. And the best lettering I've done, I'll letter during the layouts as clearly as possible. And I don't know, everybody's different. Some people just do final art, like maybe Josh Baer doesn't really have layouts. I'm not exactly sure, but some people have a more of like all three processes of layouts, pencils, and inks are all done at once. Or also people work in Procreate. There are the sort of demarcations between those steps are really vague. So maybe you do one or the other, or neither, or all of them all at once. But let's say you make layouts. In my case, I try to do layouts so I can show the editors as quickly as possible. Here's what I'm thinking. And generally speaking, most editors outside of comics practice that are editing for journalism never remark on how terrible my drawing is. So maybe that's also why I'm doing it sillier and sillier because I'm like, I dare you to say something about this noodle person. That they know it's an early draft, but it's helpful if the scripting and the pacing is very clear. So the pressure is on to make that lettering as clear as possible. One way you can do that is you can use a font even if you change it. You can use a font generator based on your handwriting. There's a few, I don't know if we're allowed to name drop them. But calligrapher without an E, like grinder, that's one that a lot of people use. And I have a couple of fonts. I think even fonts we use for saw or like that.
Mhm.
And I don't know what's some good advice. I used to really hate lettering. I found out that if I have less words per page, it just looks better. But leaving lots of space for lettering, more than I think I need, is always a good move. And also doing my lettering on the page or on the panel, and then drawing a caption box or a word balloon around it. And also not having a line of text that goes all the way across the page. Tom taught me that one. He was like, you don't want these long Hindenburg balloons. You want like little circles. And I've noticed that. And there's always there are rules and then you break all of them and it still looks awesome. But these are things that I was like, oh, this looks really good. The other thing is when I force myself to sort of eat my vegetables first. Some people love lettering, so forgive. I mean, I don't even hate lettering all that as much as I'm saying, but I used to be really afraid of it, I think, because I wanted it to be beautiful. If I did my lettering first and had goofy drawings, but I inked my lettering and my panels first, I'd be like, wow, this looks like a real comic. Like maybe the drawing will turn out beautiful too. And so like in a way it like the lettering made the drawing like the vegetables I didn't want to eat. Making the drawing really good. I don't know. What do you have to say on lettering, Tom? How do we do it?
Oh my God. Well, you know me by now. I think we've.
You letter with a nib like a maniac, and it looks amazing. It's so beautiful.
Well, that's true. But to answer your question, I was going to go. I always dial it back really far. You know, I'm always like, we're just creatures, right? And I think I am going to go there again and be
Okay, do
like,
it.
what's the lettering for? You know, the lettering
Okay.
is 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 for communication, right? We're creatures of who want to communicate. So that's our main concern. Not it has to look a certain way. But we also communicate through style, and we communicate through line and drawing and the artwork. So like so we don't want to fall into the trap where like I'm just trying to communicate. So I put my Arial font in there and it works. But but that isn't enough because we're taking some sort of effort to make a drawing or even a photograph or a collage or something and put that down. So we need to treat the lettering like it's part of the communication or expression, right? I mean, my friend Justine doesn't really like that term expression. She's like, I don't believe in self-expression. And I'm not sure what she believes in. Maybe it's communication.
Which is so funny because Justine's stuff is like gorgeous.
Well, I
Very
know, but
expressive.
yeah, I have to nail her down on that. But but I think she thinks it's a cop out to not try to communicate effectively or to make something artistically bolder than you might be capable, than you might think you're capable of. Because we could go on a tangent about Justine and some of her ideas, which are great. But what was I talking about? Lettering.
Yes. Yeah.
But so like I would just start there. It's like what is the lettering doing here? The truth is a lot of us come from from some of the comic traditions where we use these things that we tend to call word balloons, and we use these things that we tend to call caption boxes, and so that's okay. We don't have to, but it's okay if we want to. And if we want to, there are plenty of tools to have us use them well that integrate well with a variety of different types of drawing styles, or our own drawing style. Those tips are out there. There's a million good resources for it.
Hmm.
But I'm more like, aren't the letters part of the story? Aren't they part of why you're here? These, whether characters are speaking, thinking, whether they're reflecting. What is language for? See, now I'm really getting in the weeds, not
Yeah,
in the weeds,
and Tom,
I'm
when you
getting
talk
in the
about like some of
clouds.
our early drawing experiences, Tom was telling me this before the call that some of our earliest drawing experiences are writing our name on paper and
Mhm.
learning letters. Did you want to add anything to that, Tom? Or is that all you wanted to?
what you,
Well,
you
I'm trying to lead you to the water here. Like you had
oh,
mentioned
okay.
it, like I want to talk about lettering in the context, and maybe you've already done it, but when we're really, really, really little and we're learning how to hold a pencil or a crayon, we're writing our name for the first time. The lettering of how we introduce ourselves or say our name or write our name
Yeah. Yeah.
is a style of drawing. I don't know if maybe that's just the whole thought, but
Well,
I
it
don't know.
really is. And maybe like you and I were just talking 10 minutes ago about like this getting into this children's mindset, this beginner's mindset about our drawings and about what it looks like and like how can I have fun doing it, et cetera. Maybe reminding ourselves of what our earliest experiences with lettering would help. And for me, I do remember quite well, I remember quite clearly drawing on like little yellow pieces of paper and trying to get it so it could communicate and the shapes were correct and all that stuff. And it's not that difficult to make a P and a B separate and things like that. These are easy skills to master, just as learning to draw in your own style can be also. Um, but what I was also saying is that like, when some of us learn to sign our names, we practice it and practice it and play with it. And mine got really ornate for a while. Um, and and I don't know what I was learning then, except that those symbols, those letters, were my personality somehow, right? And in some ways, they were an expression of me that even I didn't quite understand. I made this really loopy cursive H with like I had like 4 loops in it, and like I didn't have an intention. I didn't have an idea before that. I just actually I think I was copying bowling shirts, to be honest, that are embroidered and have this like fancy.
Yeah.
Um, but then I looked at it and I was like, what is that H? How is that H about me? And I just, as a child and as I slowly evolved how I write my name, think it changed. And now it's just scrawl, but
Yeah.
that's because I
Yeah.
hate the system where I have to
It's
sign
a
my name.
doctor's signature. Yeah,
Right.
totally.
But that's not how I letter my comics. And so like the obvious thing to say here is a riff off of Matt Madden and Jessica Abel's book called Drawing Pictures. What is it? Drawing words and writing pictures. Writing pictures, drawing words. Now I forget which order it is. But the idea was that you're doing both. You're treating your letters like pictures and you're treating words like visual. Anyway, the the point being is that when I'm making comics, I am treating them visually, and I'm not like hacking out my handwriting the way I do when I'm filling out a form to, the government or something, which I
Mhm.
despise. And actually, I find that easier than working in a PDF because for some reason I still can't figure out how to fill out a PDF online. But anyway, but yeah, it just comes down to like, what are your letters for? What are you trying to communicate? What are you communicating with the letters that you're currently using, and how can that change? And what are you learning? And all those questions, stuff
A
like
lot of
that.
questions, Tom.
And
But the
I'll finish
questions
by
are,
just. Oh,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was
No.
just going to finish by saying that like I never really got out of, even though I have all these grand questions, I never really got out of the tradition of being satisfied of being in the tradition that like Popeye and Peanuts and other comic strips are in. So like I'm pretty satisfied with my lettering because it feels like those kinds of comic strips. Um uh but there's any number of things you can do with lettering, and if your ideas are, if it would be very easy to make your lettering look like Roz Chast, for instance. And Roz Chast is a great cartoonist with a great uh best-selling book. And I don't suspect she hates lettering, but the point is that it's not quote great lettering. It just works really well with her style and with the ideas she's expressing. And there are plenty of other great letterers are out there for whom that's true. It works well with their style. It expresses them as much as their drawings do. Um, anyway.
That's true. One of the like sort of sub thoughts that is emerging via the chat is the idea that maybe a fear of lettering or an avoidance of lettering is also related to a lack of clarity within our scripts that we're committing to paper. And I thought that was a really good point.
Oh, who wrote that?
Well, I don't know if they said it exactly like that. And I hopefully I'm not putting words in their mouths, but Allison Kent brought it up.
Oh,
About it was kind of a question. I think it was like wondering how many people produce scripts separate from the drawing. drawings. So I don't know if I'm interpreting that question the right
Go
way.
ahead. Mhm.
Maybe Allison can add more thoughts in the chat too, if you have more to say about it. But the way that that question was phrased got me to think, the more experienced I get or more comfortable I get with making comics, I am really interested in a clean script that I don't have to adjust at all, because I'm also thinking about the way that the panels are designed and how many words should go in each panel, in addition to the language of image, the image itself. So if sometimes people have really expansive ideas and they're like, well, this is a conversation between these two characters about the grocery store trip that one of them made in a previous scene, and I'll fill out the dialogue later, which isn't a wrong way to work. But I find the more parameters I have on the script, the length of the comic itself, maybe even the medium, all the other things I'm worried about become clearer. Um, but I don't know. Allison is adding, I heard a podcast about making comic book scripts, and this gives clients a good sense of what's going to be there before you spend 3 years drawing it. It's true. I don't think it
You have a
depends on the
client.
book, but you don't necessarily, if it's a book length work, you don't have to include the whole script for the book, is my understanding. It might depend on the publisher, but if you have like a fairly good synopsis and then maybe a sample chapter or two, that's usually enough. And that's been the case to pitch to clients. And we could certainly do another episode about pitching short form comics or a book proposal. But if I'm doing a first draft, I want that script to be as clean as possible with, and when I say first draft, it's like layouts plus lettering, all where it's theoretically supposed to go. Because I need to know early on, is this all going to fit and how much space we have allotted? And I mean, it's sort of nice, and the the project I'm working on now, I'm not the one that's generating the script. So if it's too long, I can just complain about it. I can be like, this is too long. Can we cut something? Or maybe we could do this. There's been little tricks. And I learned that because when I was doing the veteran project, I didn't want to cut anything out. I thought everything was very precious. And I thought that I was going to be a clearer, more truer story if I kept everything in it, and there's no room and it looks bad. So you have to find a way to make it more concise without necessarily paraphrasing. I was interested in using words verbatim because these were oral histories. So if I wanted to edit something out, I had to kind of trim some of the language a little bit, but not so much that the statement itself would change. But that's a really specific way to work.
Right, right. We've gone on an hour. Should we wrap
Are
it
we
up?
done now?
What?
We probably could talk more about lettering, but we kept promising it. And so
Of
for anyone
course, of
who's
course. We
wanting to,
finally got into some actionable items, or at least detail
we're
about
still
what's
completely,
going on the page.
I
What?
feel like we're the Statler and Waldorf of philosophical comics creation. Like we're like, people really should just sit down and do the work. And we're like, well, and we're just swanning around talking about ideas. So get to work, everyone. Party's over.
That's right. We have to think of a Statler and Waldorf way to say that. Like,
How
this
long
will be
has he been working on that book for?
this would be the greatest comic I ever saw. If there was a
You've
comic
ever
here.
seen it? Oh no. Oh no. Let's not do that. I don't like it when we're mean. But I love the Muppets, so
I do too. This will be the last thing I say. I'm sorry I even have to say this, but the Muppet Christmas special is really great, and Statler and Waldorf play the
Marley and Marley,
Marley and Marley. Yes,
business
the
partner to
boss.
Scrooge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're right, business partner, but they're doubled up, and so they have this great song that goes where Marley and Marley, they're ghost, right? So then the next line is whoa.
Oh,
It's really wonderful. Yeah, they're great.
it
All
is
right,
good.
sorry, I can't believe I'm gonna say
No.
that. So let's ask the AI what our topic is for next week. I feel like we hit it somewhere in there. Didn't we say we had a topic for next week?
Well, we probably do. Maybe AI will tell us. Maria says, "Ooh, a book proposal info. That would be a good topic if we want to talk about book proposals." I'll
Well,
see
let's
if I can.
revisit.
What do you
Oh,
think?
sorry. let's revisit the fact that you are working on this book, The Bootlegger's Guide to Comics.
Oh no.
And there is a lot of stuff in there. So we do have things, and I assume that's one of them.
Yes. On the topic of getting to work, I really ought to work on the book. It's way more fun to talk about the book on the Terrible Anvil podcast than to sit down by myself and work on the book. So I'm eating my words here. I'm trying, don't be me. Do the work.
I want to echo what Adrian says in the chat. I think sometimes we research things too much when we really should be playing and experimenting with it. That's perfect. I totally agree. Things like lettering, et cetera, requires do it time to build up the skills and knowledge. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I do too. It's like, what if I am terrible at lettering and drawing hands, and I'm just gonna do this comic anyway, and get to the end of it and be like, ta-da! And Sally says, how about talking about pitching, since pitching for the next anthology is coming up? There's an anthology call for entries. It's in the Flow group. I think it's available for people who have access to Flow. So that'd be the year-long program as well, Tom? In the year-long program in the Flow group, can you?
They have their own anthology coming up, but everybody else in Flow, which is like, memoir group and the alumni group. Yeah, our next anthology is called Troubled History.
Troubled History.
Yeah, and sure. Sure. So maybe the next topic is like talking about ideas in more actionable ways, more specific ways.
How to button up your idea and put a tie on it and send it out there to represent the idea.
All right. All right. Did you get that, AI? Put that in our summary.
Thank you, robots.
All right, Jess. I think we've done enough.
For anyone that doesn't know why we're giggling and talking about AI fondly at the end of a call, it's because the last time we did a podcast, the AI forces did like a summary of our call, and it was really good. It was better than my recaps, and I feel like I'm becoming redundant. So anyway, that's what that is. It's lovely to spend time with you, Tom.
your recap was full of creature energy, and that recap was full of machine energy.
Okay, keep the creature energy going, and we'll see you for episode 6. I can't believe we're doing this. This
All right.
Crazy.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jess. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.